I feel did a bad job at explaining the histories between black people, especially those of the female kind, and their role in Islam. And I think the reason why I did this was because I jumped too far ahead and went straight to the golden age of Islam when things had already been kicking up. Maybe what I should have done is went backwards so that people can understand the foundations of Islam and why it had such an open mentality to people of all races. Let's first go back to Christianity for a second prior to Islam. And what we will find is verses in Christianity that talk about Cushitics and other types of people. And there's a verse that says that God does not discriminate between Jew or Greek, male or female. He does not see the discriminations of men, but instead everyone is a child of God. That's in the Christian Bible. With things like this and the fact that Islam is a post Christian religion, we can now come to the conclusion of what happened. So we know that Christianity had a bunch of martyrs and stuff like that. But did Islam? Of course. So the question is, who was the first martyr of Islam? Everyone, get your answers out. The answer is Sumaya, a female. The first martyr of Islam was a female. But what kind of female was she? Well, before I say that, let's start with the fact that she was a slave girl who was then married to her slave master years later, and both her slave master and slash husband and her would be tortured for believing in Islam. She was an Abyssinian woman.
Her story is powerful, and it gives us a lot. And I want to paint a picture, inshallah ta'ala, of her life before Islam. Her life before Islam. She was an Abyssinian woman, so modern day Ethiopia. She's from Habasha originally. She was born about 20 years before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that would put her well into her 60s at the time where she would be killed. Okay, at the time where she'd embrace Islam and where she would be killed.
Meaning she was a black woman. One of two very important ones, her and Ayman, and something that they have in common is their bravery well into their old age. Because the thing that makes her a martyr, even her husband wasn't as strong as she was, what makes her a martyr is that she never cursed Muhammad or Allah in their torture. She didn't even do it even then. And when the torturer of her in Mecca, decided that he was about to kill them both, the husband and the wife, he went straight to her and said, "Hey, I'm about to kill your husband, but that's what you want, isn't it? Because you want to marry Muhammad." She spat at him, insulted by this. And that's when he decided to stab her to death. And in that very moment, she saw her life in paradise. That's how the story goes. That's the first person who is martyred for Islam, an Abyssinian woman. The second story is of a man called Wahshi ibn Harb, who was an Abyssinian man who ended the life of Hamza, a uncle of Muhammad. And the way he did it was because of revenge, by throwing a spear through his back that came out through his front. Now, this person would eventually convert to Islam and go and confess everything that he did to Muhammad, and Muhammad would still be angry with him and say he does not want to see his face ever again. but not doing anything to him since he was a Muslim. Like I said, once you convert to Islam, you are basically safe. Now, what happened? Well, firstly, there was a woman called Hind. This woman called Hind was traveling one day on a, they were just traveling on a caravan, and then all of a sudden, Muhammad's men attacked this woman who was a pagan, and this woman was saved by a bunch of people, especially her husband, but someone important to her died. And during this, she realized that the person who did it was Muhammad, and so she wanted revenge on Muhammad. And so she went and told her father and all these other people, who one of the people got Wahashi, the slave owner of Wahashi, said to Wahashi, who was a skilled warrior, slave and skilled warrior, he said, "Go and kill Hamza, and who was a great warrior, and you will get your freedom." And he did it. He went and killed Hamza in the way I told you. He found him and threw a spear in his back, and the spear came out in his front. And then later he converted to Islam because he was scared and blah blah blah. And then he went and became, you know, a another important figure in Islam after killing an enemy of Islam. But before this, during the war that led to the death of Hamza, he actually went and found out, or got around, Hind, and Hind said to him as she passed him, Washi, she supposedly called, "Come on, black man, satisfy your vengeance and ours," because Hamza was the one who had killed her uncle, as you can see there. That's how we have a full understanding. Only one of them. I mean, there's other evidence, but I just want to give you one easy one to show you that this person was absolutely an Ethiopian. Now, I have to mention that one of the things that happened before Islam came was that the Abyssinians had taken over Yemen and parts of Mecca. The places of Yemen that were taken over had the leftover genetics of black people in that region. And so a lot of people that are mentioned are described as having very dark skin, with no doubt them being genetically related to these Abyssinians who had taken over this region. Now, one of the people who had extremely dark skin was Miqdad. Miqdad was a very close companion of Muhammad, and he was there in almost every single war, and was again a very good fighter, and he was described physically as
No longer just a Halif, you're no longer just someone who's protected by my tribe, you are my son. So they took him to the central place, of course, around the Kaaba, and he announced that this man, Al-Miqdad, is now no longer Al-Miqdad ibn Amr, he is my son, Al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswad. So that's why you'll find the confusion in his name, because he had his actual father in Yemen, and then the man who adopted him in Mecca after he fled Yemen, after that conflict that he had with his fellow tribesmen. Now, what was his physical appearance like? Now, sometimes with the Sahaba, you don't find much information about their physical appearance. It's actually really interesting because sometimes you'll have a long bio, but very few details about their physical appearance. Sometimes you'll have a very short bio, and then a lot of details about their physical appearance, right? Which just shows you that the biographers focused on different things. But Al-Miqdad had a very prominent physical appearance. Okay? So the way he's described, everything about Miqdad stood out physically. Everything about him stood out. He was extremely tall. He was extremely muscular. He had a big belly, alim al-batn. He had a whole lot of hair. He was extremely dark, like a shiny black color. His skin was extremely dark. His beard, he used to dye it blonde. His eyes were extremely big and round, and his nose was very prominent. So you looked at him and you just saw an extremely unique person, an imposing physical appearance, that made him stand out wherever he was.
He was also one of those mentioned as one of the top Muslims mentioned in the early writings. But there's something more important than this that I have to mention. So this is a list of the seventh earliest converts to Islam who matter most. So, as we read, according to one tradition, Sumaya was one of the first seven to display Islam, the other six being Muhammad, of course, Abu Bakr, Bilal, Khabab, Suhab, and her son Amr. Now, an interesting thing about this tradition is that at least four of these people are black. Amr, the son of Sumaya, is black. Sumaya is black. Bilal is black. And then there's also the one that I just mentioned right now, who is not shown on this list. But the connection between Abyssinia and early Islam doesn't end there, because of course there was people who were against Islam in Arabia, and because of this reason some Muslims escaped to Abyssinia to avoid being affected by this attack. In fact, one of the wives of Muhammad got married while Muhammad was in prison, well, got married off to Muhammad by a Nagus, a king of Ethiopia. This taking place during the escape of the Islamic people into Christian Abyssinia. And the reason why this Christian Abyssinia was a safe haven was because, well, according to the writings, this man, this Christian king, was just, and he didn't go after people's religions because they were not Christian. But that's a story for another day. As we read, Habiba was married to the Prophet Muhammad, though through the proxy of the emperor of Abyssinia. She was the daughter of the chief of Makkah. Her name was Ramla bint Abi Sufyan. She was born 25 years before the Hijrah. Judging by these early connections, you should be able to tell that the thing that's happening right now is that they are learning how to talk and operate in a wider world than what was there before. And so, this world that is being established and being mocked up by the people is not one that is of one sidedness of Arabians or whoever, but instead is a world that is bigger. Now, I'm mentioning Abyssinians, but there were also Persians, Europeans, and all kinds of other people who would have been involved. But you can see here that some of the most important early people who happen to be on the side of the Muslims are Abyssinians. This goes against anything we know about what would happen later in the golden age of Islam, especially with people who were, I mean, I have to say, racist towards the Abyssinians and did not want anything to do with black in general. But these people were clearly going against the main thoughts of the Islamic people because they had examples in the Quranic and Hadiths and all these other books. They had examples of how to treat people of different races, especially those of that race, and how a lot of the black women were being portrayed as these very strong women who never folded in the world of torture. In fact, you see one by one that in Yemen there was a lot of black people, and this is why they keep mentioning one after the other, and I could mention maybe six, seven more people from Yemen who were black and fought in wars or helped with during the time of Muhammad or just before or just after.
because their connection was just wide. And it wasn't just in Islam that the connection was wide. In some of their other mythologies, the Abyssinians are seen all over the place, including stuff as far away as Egypt.